Congressman, I want to get your reaction to the U.S. intelligence analysts assessing that Kim Jong-un's regime has crossed a major threshold in developing a miniaturized nuclear warhead that could fit inside a missile.
Well, if true, it represents the greatest crisis probably since, let me rephrase that, undoubtedly since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the correlation is very similar. This is something that can hit us and our allies, and it's with a rogue nation that we suspect would use it. So, you know, as Rex Tillerson, Secretary Tillerson, goes around enforcing the unanimous Security Council resolution to cut off the funding to this regime, it's got to be done in real time. It's got to be done now.
The White House says all options are on the table, but of course they would prefer to negotiate. North Korea has shown no willingness to discuss their nuclear program that we can see. Do you think that the U.S. is headed to a military confrontation with North Korea?
I believe military has to be the backup plan, and diplomacy, but diplomacy of the type we're using now, cutting off the last, if you will, couple of $1 billion of hard money to this regime, cuts off the ability for this dictator, Kim Jong-un, to fund his generals, to fund the regime that ultimately, you've seen him, he's not the general in charge. People don't follow him because they're inspired. They follow this dictator because he doles out some of the very limited money to his generals. The last dollar doesn't go in North Korea, doesn't go to the people. It goes to the general and to the weapons program. And finally, we are on the path toward cutting off all funds. If we cut off all currency, hard currency to this regime is going to have to choose nuclear weapons or an internal problem that this dictator probably cannot deal with.
Now, China, North Korea's strongest ally in the region, voted in favor of the new package of UN sanctions passed this weekend against North Korea. But there are a lot of people who say that if you really want to go after North Korea, you need to sanction the Chinese banks that do business with North Korea. What more would you like to see from Beijing to solve this problem?
Well, I think for our own, if you will, intelligence community, they need to determine whether or not China is living up to the promise they made at the UN. If they're not, we need to make sure they do. And if they are, then this regime will recognize that they no longer have the support of China. So you're exactly right. Those banks and the countries, quite frankly, that have been taking in slave labor in return for hard currency, that behavior has to change. It has to change immediately. And as you know, Jake, to get a 15-0, a unanimous decision out of the Security Council, does make a statement that it's not about U.S. imperialism, as the North Koreans would like to say. Their greatest and most important ally, China, a country that gave up 600,000 lives to protect them in the 1950s, has said that their conduct is one that deserved these sanctions. And as long as we hold China to their word, then I believe these sanctions will finally work.
Siegfried Hecker was the last U.S. official to inspect North Korea's nuclear program, and he says that Kim Jong-un is not crazy, he's not suicidal, he's not unpredictable. What do you think?
Well, I think you have to assume that at least his generals are not crazy, are not suicidal, and they will make sure that his decisions are consistent with the survival of the regime. And if we cut off the money, as we now are doing, in a way that threatens the survival of the regime unless they change their behavior, I believe we have a chance at changing the behavior peacefully. And again, I keep relating this to what John F. Kennedy faced 55 years ago. You have to stand firm and not flinch. And at the same time, you have to give them a diplomatic out. There is a diplomatic out that the regime has, but their time is running out. And when China turns against North Korea, they've got to realize their time is